Hello everyone, welcome to the video. In this video we will look at loop operations in R, and specifically we are going to look at a for loop. We'll look at some of the basic examples to gain understanding of the arguments and what exactly can we do with the for loop. Then we'll also talk about when to use a for loop and when exactly it should not be used in coding practices. Let's quickly look at an example. Let's say I initialize a vector x 1 through 5 and just print it. Let's say if I want to use a for loop to print the elements in x, I can specify a very simple construct where I just say for I'm just initializing I for each elements in x, and then for each element which is contained in y, I'm just trying to print that. So I'm saying iterate through each element in x and then print that individual element. So if I execute this, I will just get 1 through 5. So you see, basically for loop has two parts. One is the argument part where we specify how exactly we have to iterate through x or any input data, and in the body we mention what exactly do we need to do with that particular data. Let's say if I want to print I, or if I want to add uh, you know a value of 2 to the number I and then print the value of the newly formed variable. So essentially, there are two parts to a for loop where one I specify how exactly do I want to iterate, and in the second part I mention or specify what exactly do I need to do with that part. Let's look at another example. I am initializing a list where it contains three components. First is the vector 1 through 6. Second component is a character vector which has value a and b. And the third component is a data frame with header a and value from 1 through 6. Let's say if I want to print the elements in L1. So I will basically get three components. First is the numeric vector, second is the character vector, and the third is the data frame. Let's say I want to print the class of these individual components in L1. So I can just specify print class of I. So I can basically do that. It's very simple. The first and second component are vectors and the third component is a data frame, as can be seen here as well. So basically we saw how we can use a for loop through three simple examples. And first we took a vector, we printed the numbers. Second we took a list, we printed the individual components in the list, and in the third example we printed what is the class of these individual components. However, I must say that these are not best examples or best use cases of a for loop. The reason being, if I wanted to print elements in x, I don't need a for loop. I can just print x. Or let's say if I want to print individual components in a list, I can just use a print L1 and that would suffice. These examples were given because they are simple enough to understand, and the other thing is we want to just understand how exactly we can use a for loop without going into a very complex structure. Now the other thing is, why is it always said that we should avoid looping practices in any programming language, and specifically since we are talking about R, it is also said that we should never use a for loop. The people, why people say that is, let's understand when exactly can we use a loop. Let's say for example, I am trying to analyze the week by week inventory levels of a product. Let's say laptop. Let's say there is a company who manufactures laptop, and we have 7 weeks of data, and for each week we are trying to analyze lowest level of inventory. Now for we if when I go to week 1, consider it as a looping operation. When I go to week 1, I calculate the minimum level of inventory, and then when I'm planning for second week, I will take this minimum level of inventory as my input point or an input data point. When I go to week 3, I will take a minimum level of inventory from week 2 and so on. So we see in all these steps, current week of inventory or current planning for this week is dependent upon the inventory levels from previous week, in the sense that all these levels are dependent upon, or all these iterations are dependent upon each other. So wherever there is such a dependency or different iteration or steps are connected with each other, we will use a for loop. However, when these are not essentially connected, let's say I want to calculate the number of inventory sold for each week. So I don't need to use a for loop there. I can just use an sapply or an lapply and I can definitely get an answer. So you got the difference, right? Whenever there is a dependency between different steps or iterations, or when these iterations are cascaded, we will use a for loop or a while loop or any other loop for that matter. However, when there is no dependency as such between different steps, we won't use loop. We will use sapply and lapply. I will show you how to do that in other videos.